Hi again, it's Jeff, and we're going to do some more work with 3D modeling now. In fact, we're going to jump in and create our first design together. So we need an example, we need a part to actually build, and I thought a fun place to start might be with this part right here. Now, this model was designed by one of the students here at LoisLab. His name is Ilya. And he's been working on an independent project over the summer where he's exploring the relationship between speed, acceleration, and distance. And he's been doing his experiments using these stomp rockets and other model rockets as well. Now, in order to take some measurements, some acceleration measurements, he needed a way to mount some instruments on a rocket like this. And so he learned a little bit about modeling in Fusion so he could create this part right here. Now, this is a printed part, and it's got a few features. It's got this little shelf down here which supports the battery pack, and it's got this surface over here where the Raspberry Pi computer that's actually doing the data logging can be mounted, and then also room for these accelerometers up here, which are actually gathering the data, communicating with the Raspberry Pi where it can store the data. So this is a very straightforward part, but it does a great job. And this only took a few minutes to model, and maybe an hour or two to print, and so that's a great prototype and a way to facilitate the experiment. So let's recreate this part in Fusion. So I'm starting with a new untitled project in Fusion, and there's a couple of steps that are sort of good practice to start with. I don't always follow this advice, but if you get into these habits now, it's going to save you a little bit of hassle later. And it may not be obvious until we get into later lessons and we talk about revising parts and doing assemblies. But first couple of things you want to do in Fusion are, first of all, if you click on the top level item in the browser where it currently says unsaved, you have an option there for creating a new component. Now, a component is a collection of bodies in your design that can be used later in assemblies. And we're going to create this component now, and we're going to make it active, which is the default. You see next to the component name there's a circle with a dot in it. This means that all of the operations we take in our design are going to be part of this component. Now, with only one component in the design, all of our changes, all of our sketches, all of our features are going to be part of that component anyway. But by starting this way, it gets us in the habit of creating components and activating those components so that we always know where our changes are going. So we're gonna start there. We're gonna try to build that habit, and we're also going to save this design now. I'm gonna name it rocket part. You can call it whatever you like. And so now we've got our part created and named, and we've got our first component. Okay, so the basic workflow in Fusion, and really sort of the main focus of this short lesson, is to think about the design process as creating a sketch and then doing an operation on that sketch to create a 3D body. Okay, so let's work through that together. But basically, that's the workflow that we're gonna follow about 90% of the time when working in Fusion. So the way that we get started is we go to the Create menu and we say Create Sketch. And we choose the work plane that we want to start the sketch on. I'm going to do it on the XY plane. That's the flat, sort of horizontal base plane here. And you can see that immediately takes us into a 2D drawing space. And this is where we're going to make our first sketch. And it's going to be a really simple one. We're going to start by modeling the center section of the rocket body. And we're going to do that by drawing a square and extruding it into this rectangular solid shape. So in our workspace, we can go back up to the Create menu, and we have a whole selection of 2D drawing tools here. We're going to choose the 2-point rectangle. This is kind of the most commonly used rectangle. And I'm going to click on the origin where the two axes, the X and Y axes, meet to start drawing this rectangle. And you can see when I drag the mouse out and to the right, up and to the right, it starts drawing that rectangle. Now, before I click to end that rectangle, I'm going to give it some dimensions. Now, we're going to talk a lot more in depth about dimensions and constraints in a future lesson. But for now, we're going to use it as a shortcut to define the size of this rectangle. And the way that we do that is you can see as I'm dragging the rectangle up and to the right, I have two dimensions that I can fill in. So I'm going to type in 35 millimeters into the first one. I'm going to hit Tab and then type 35 in the other one and hit Enter. And you can see now that rectangle is showing as dimensioned at 35 millimeters on a side, and it's shaded orange, which means it's a closed shape. We're going to talk about the importance of that in greater depth later on, but basically a closed shape is required for you to extrude into 3 dimensions, and a rectangle is always going to be a closed shape, but that's a visual indicator if you're drawing shapes by hand that you've closed that form. So let's go ahead and click Finish Sketch. It's in the upper right, and that's going to take us back out of the 2D view into our 3D workspace. Now we've got a square drawn on the base plane, but we want to turn that into a 3D body. And the way that we do that, there's actually several ways that we can do that, and we're going to learn them over time. But for now, we're going to go back to the Create menu and choose Extrude. And I already had the rectangle selected, so it knows that I'm extruding that. But if you didn't have it selected, you can go and click on it now, and you'll see that you'll get this arrow that you can drag. You can drag it up or down, and this allows us to stretch that sketch into 3-dimensional space. Now, we want this to be about 70 millimeters in length. So you can drag it out to 70 millimeters, or like we did before, you can type in the number you want and hit Enter. Pardon me. And you can see now we have our first solid shape in Fusion. So congratulations, you've created your first 3D solid design. But this rectangular solid by itself isn't really that useful to us. We need a few more features. I think next we should create the hole that travels down through the body of our rocket part that allows us to pass the Stomp rocket body through it. So we're going to create another sketch to create that feature. So we can go back to the Create menu and say Create Sketch. Now, we could create it on that sketch on the base plane again, draw that circle and bring it up through. But this is a good time to point out that your sketches can be drawn on any flat surface, either a plane in the modeling environment or a flat surface on an existing body that you've drawn. So in this case, we can create that circle on the top surface of the body we just extruded. So I'm going to click on that top plane, and you can see it brings us back down into the 2D modeling environment. So we're going to create that circle that's going to be the channel passing through our component. So I'm going to come down to Circle, and I'm going to choose Center Diameter Circle. Again, this is the most common circle tool that we have, but we've got several others, and you'll find opportunities to use those later on. Let's choose Center Diameter Circle, and we're going to draw this circle by clicking where we want the center of the circle and then pulling out to draw the diameter. Now, you may be wondering how we're going to place this exactly in the center of this square on our sketch. And there's a couple of different ways to find the center. The easiest when I'm working on a quick sketch like this is once you have the tool selected, you can drag the cursor along the top line of your body, and you can see it snaps to the center of this line. It gives a little X indicator and a little triangle. That indicates the midpoint. So that's the midpoint of this line. And you can see when I start dragging down, it's giving us a dashed line as a snap reference to orient on the midpoint of that line. If I move over and drag down the right-hand side of the rectangle, we get another snap to the midpoint. If I come out to the center, because I've referenced the top midpoint and the side midpoint, now it gives us two dashed lines to indicate where the center of this sketch is. If I click there to start my circle, I can drag out like we did before with the rectangle, and I can give it the dimension that I want, which in this case is 17 millimeters. We can click on Finish Sketch in the upper right, and we can see as we come back out into our sketching environment that we've got the three-dimensional environment. We've got that circle right up on top of our body there. We'll go back to the Create menu. We'll choose Extrude. We'll click on that circle. Now, once again, you can see we can extrude this out. Now, going up gives us a positive solid body again. That's like a peg coming out of the top of our part. That's not what we want. If we drag it downward, you can see in the operation area of the extrude tool, it automatically changes over to a cut operation. And if we drag it down through the body, you can see it's using that circle to cut away material out of the center of our body. We'll click OK, and if we use our little view cube in the upper right, you can see, now we can see that hole straight down through our part. Okay, so we're well on our way here. Next, I think we should create this little shelf that's going to support our battery pack. When the rocket goes up, that supports the battery pack from underneath and keeps it from falling off. So let's go ahead and create that feature. So if we go back and choose Create Sketch. Now, as I've mentioned before, there's multiple ways to create features, any given feature. As an example, we could go back to the base plane and draw another rectangle next to that original rectangle that gave us the main body of our part. We could draw another rectangle next to that and extrude it up to give us the about 3 millimeters of thickness we need for this shelf. But we can extrude in multiple directions, and we can sketch on any flat surface. So we could also do a narrow rectangle on this side of the part and extrude it outward to create that shelf. Why don't we do that, just because it's a little bit different from the other operations we've done so far. So when I choose Create New Sketch, I'm going to click on the side of the part. And you can see now our 2D sketch environment is showing the side of our solid body. I'm going to go up to the Create menu again under Rectangle. Notice for 2-point rectangle, which we've used now already, there's a little letter R. That's a hotkey. As you get more comfortable in the modeling environment, you can use letters on the keyboard to shortcut to tools, and it speeds up the modeling process significantly. So in our sketch environment, if I hit R for rectangle, it selects the 2-point rectangle tool. So now I'll click down on the lower left corner of the existing part, and I'm going to draw across, and it snaps to the right-hand side of our rectangle. So now we know that our rectangle is going to be the full width of the side of our part. And then I could either drag it up to give us the height that I want, or in this case, because I want to be precise, I'm going to type in the number 3 in the height dimension box and hit enter. And now I've got a very short rectangle on the side of my part that's 3 millimeters tall and the full 35 millimeter width of the part. I can click Finish Sketch, and now I can choose the Extrude tool again. Now notice we've got a hotkey here, E for Extrude. So I'll click E for Extrude, click on that rectangle, and drag it out. I want about 25 millimeters to give me enough room for that battery pack. Okay, we're making some good progress here with the part. I think the next feature we should add is this extension up here. You can see on the side of the part, we need enough room for the Raspberry Pi and also the accelerometers up here. So we're going to create this extension that's going to give us enough space to mount those accelerometers. So we'll do a new sketch, just like before. We'll click on the top surface of the part this time. And just like before, I'm going to hit R for rectangle. And I'm going to draw a narrow rectangle that I'm going to extrude to give me the space that I need. Click Finish Sketch. Click E for Extrude. Select that rectangle. I'm going to drag it up 30 millimeters and hit OK. Okay, our part is really getting some sophistication here. We've got the bulk of the part is that original extrusion that gives us sort of the space that we need to mount the Raspberry Pi and gives us a solid body to create the channel for the stomp rocket. We've added extensions for the support of the battery pack and to mount the accelerometers. At this point, we can save our work. Honestly, I probably should have been saving a little more frequently than I had. But we'll go ahead and save it now, and we can export this for 3D printing. If you click on if you right-click on the top name of the part, there under the browser, there's an option about halfway down for Save as STL, and that's the format that we need for 3D printing. Okay, so we'll stop our work together on this part here. If you want to continue, which I highly recommend, the more time you spend in this program, the more comfortable you're going to be with the interface and the more fluent you're going to be in the modeling operations, I would say that you can take this part a little bit further. You can find some of the tools in the menus that you want to experiment with. As goals, you could try to reduce the bulk of the part. That center part of the section, that center section of the part is really just a solid block. Maybe you could remove some material to make it print faster or be a little bit lighter weight. Maybe you could find a way to streamline the design, or you could just change the aesthetics of the part to be a little bit more to your tastes. So why don't you go ahead and work on that independently and share what you come up with the class. In the next lesson, we're going to do a different modeling exercise. It's going to be another walkthrough together, but we're going to focus on a slightly different aspect of 3D model design and workflow. So look for that lesson on the YouTube channel, and I'll see you over there.